What if the very people who tried to shake your foundation are now watching their own world crumble? What if the alliance that once stood confidently against you is no longer as strong as it appeared? Chosen ones, there is something you need to understand. Not everything that looks united is truly aligned. Not every partnership built on strategy is built on peace. There was a time when they believed they had the upper hand. They studied you. They discussed you. They may have even bonded over their shared opposition to you. For a while, their connection seemed powerful, almost unbreakable. But here is a truth that history and human psychology both confirms. Relationships rooted in negativity eventually turn that negativity inward. Think about it. When two people come together, primarily because of a shared resentment, what happens once that resentment no longer produces the same energy? What happens when the excitement of targeting someone fades and real life sets in? The foundation begins to show cracks. Chosen ones, you were never the real glue holding them together. You were the distraction. And once distractions lose their power, reality steps forward. One of them is starting to question everything. The conversations have changed. The tone has shifted. Doubt has entered the room. Perhaps quietly at first, just a passing thought. But doubt, once planted, grows. One of them is thinking, was this worth it? They are replaying moments in their mind. They are noticing inconsistencies. They are recognizing that loyalty built on shared hostility does not translate into genuine trust. Because here is the deeper truth. When two people unite to harm another, they are also revealing what they are capable of. And once that realization sinks in, it becomes impossible to ignore. If they could betray you, what stops them from betraying each other? This is not about revenge. It is not about celebrating anyone's downfall. It is about understanding a universal principle of human behavior. Actions have consequences. Intentions shape outcomes. Energy invested in tearing someone down rarely builds something stable. You, on the other hand, were forced into growth. You had to reflect. You had to strengthen your character. You had to develop resilience. While they were focused outward, you were developing inward. And that difference changes everything. Have you noticed how silence unsettles those who expected reaction? Have you noticed how composure confuses those who anticipated chaos? Your refusal to engage in the same negativity altered the trajectory of the entire situation. Without conflict to feed on, their dynamic began to shift. Now one of them feels it more deeply than the other. There is restlessness. There is overthinking. There is a subtle awareness that something is off. The very traits they once admired in each other now feel unsettling. What once felt like unity now feels like tension. Chosen ones, this is not coincidence. When intentions are misaligned with integrity, instability follows. You did not need to interfere. You did not need to retaliate. Time has a way of revealing what emotion tries to hide, and the unraveling has already begun. One of them can feel it slipping. The silence between them is heavier now. Conversations that once flowed with confidence are filled with hesitation. There is an unspoken tension lingering in the air, and the most uncomfortable part. They both know it, but neither wants to admit it. Chosen ones, have you ever noticed how alliances built in secrecy often struggle in the light? When two people bond over a shared mission against someone else, their focus remains external. But once that external focus disappears, they are left facing each other, and that is when the real test begins. One of them has started asking internal questions. Not out loud, not directly, but internally. Was the narrative they created about you completely accurate? Were the assumptions justified? Or was it easier to paint you as the problem rather than confront their own insecurities? Because sometimes targeting someone strong is a way to temporarily feel powerful. Sometimes diminishing another person creates the illusion of unity. But illusions do not sustain relationships. Reality does. The dynamic between them has changed. What once felt like teamwork now feels like suspicion. The same sharp observations they once used against you are now being used against each other. Tone is analyzed. Messages are reread. Motives are questioned. When trust is built on shaky ground, even small misunderstandings feel threatening. One of them is beginning to see patterns. They are noticing how easily their partner speaks negatively about others. And a quiet thought enters the mind. If they speak this way about everyone else, how do they speak about me when I am not around? That thought does not leave easily. It lingers. Chosen ones understand this clearly. When people connect through negativity, they train themselves to search for flaws. It becomes a habit. And habits do not turn off simply because the target changes. Eventually, that same critical lens turns inward. You may not see it publicly. They might still appear united in front of others. They might still maintain a confident exterior. But behind closed doors, things feel different. The energy is heavier. The laughter is less genuine. The trust is thinner. One of them is also wrestling with regret. Not necessarily because of guilt toward you, but because they sense instability creeping into their own life. There is an awareness that what they helped create is now circling back, and that awareness is uncomfortable. Have you ever observed how people project their internal fears outward? If one partner begins to fear betrayal, they may start accusing. If one feels insecure, they may start controlling. These reactions do not strengthen a relationship. They strain it. And here is where it becomes clear you were never the true issue. You were a symbol, a convenient focal point for unresolved emotions. Once that symbol is removed, the unresolved emotions remain. Chosen ones, your growth forced exposure. Your resilience disrupted their narrative. And now, without the distraction of opposing you, they are left confronting their own reflection in each other. This is not about karma in a mystical sense. It is about psychological cause and effect. When trust is compromised at the foundation, cracks will eventually surface. When communication is rooted in manipulation or exaggeration, authenticity becomes difficult. One of them feels it deeply now. There is overthinking late at night. There is comparison. There is doubt. And doubt, once introduced into a fragile structure, does not quietly disappear. The unraveling is subtle, but it is steady. There is a shift happening that neither of them can fully control. It is subtle at first, almost invisible to the outside world. But inside their dynamic, it feels undeniable. The same certainty that once bonded them has been replaced with quiet evaluation. And evaluation leads to awareness. Chosen ones, awareness changes everything. One of them has started to observe rather than react. They are paying attention to tone, to body language, to inconsistencies in stories. They are noticing how quickly narratives change depending on the audience. And slowly, a realization forms. If someone can distort truth for convenience once, they can do it again. That thought creates distance. Distance does not always show up as separation. Sometimes it appears as politeness without warmth. Conversations become transactional. Smiles feel rehearsed. Even shared memories begin to feel different when viewed through a lens of doubt. Have you ever noticed how trust, once cracked, never quite feels the same? It can be repaired, perhaps, but the awareness of vulnerability remains. One of them now sees the cracks clearly, and instead of focusing on you, Their attention is redirected inward, toward the very person who once stood beside them in opposition. The irony is powerful. They once felt strong together because they believed they understood each other completely. They believed they were aligned in purpose, but purpose built around tearing someone down is not sustainable. When there is no longer an external enemy, what is left to unite them? Differences. And those differences were always there. They were simply overshadowed by shared negativity. Now those differences are magnified. Values do not fully align. Communication styles clash. One prefers transparency, the other prefers control. One seeks stability, the other thrives on drama. Chosen ones, this is where emotional reflection begins to take root. One of them is starting to see that their connection may have been fueled more by intensity than by integrity. Intensity can feel intoxicating. It creates urgency, excitement, a sense of purpose. But integrity creates peace. And without peace, relationships begin to feel exhausting. There are more arguments now. Small issues escalate quickly. Why? Because unresolved guilt and insecurity amplify everything. When someone feels uncertain about the foundation of their relationship, even minor disagreements feel threatening, and beneath it all lies a silent fear. If this partnership was formed through opposition to someone else, what happens if that pattern repeats? What if the same dynamic that brought us together eventually pulls us apart? That fear is not irrational. It is logical. One of them is also reflecting on you more objectively now. Not with resentment, but with curiosity. Were you truly the villain in their story? Or were you simply independent, unbothered, unwilling to conform? The more they analyze, the more complicated the narrative becomes. And complexity challenges the simplicity of blame. Chosen ones, your strength forced introspection, not because you confronted them loudly, but because you remained steady. Stability in the presence of chaos exposes instability. Calmness in the presence of manipulation highlights manipulation. This is not about superiority. It is about contrast. The contrast between growth and stagnation, between self-awareness and projection, between integrity and convenience. Now one of them feels emotionally conflicted. There is attachment, yes. There may even be genuine care. But there is also doubt, and doubt changes how love is experienced. It creates hesitation where there was once certainty. The unraveling is no longer just subtle tension. It is becoming emotional distance. An emotional distance, once established, is difficult to reverse. Now the truth is becoming unavoidable. What once felt like a powerful alliance now feels fragile. The confidence they displayed in public no longer matches the uncertainty they feel in private. The foundation they believed was solid is revealing its cracks. And cracks, when ignored, do not disappear. They expand. Chosen ones, this is where everything comes full circle. One of them is no longer just questioning quietly. The questions are becoming conversations. The conversations are becoming disagreements. And the disagreements are exposing deeper issues that were always there, but conveniently overlooked. There is a realization forming. Their connection was built more on reaction than intention. They reacted to you. They reacted to their own insecurities. They reacted to circumstances instead of intentionally building something rooted in trust and shared values. And reaction-based foundations rarely survive long-term pressure. Think about it. When two people unite primarily to challenge or diminish someone else, what happens when that mission loses relevance? What happens when the person they targeted continues forward, unbroken, unaffected, still progressing? They are left facing each other without the distraction. One of them now sees the imbalance clearly. They recognize moments where exaggeration replaced honesty, where encouragement turned into enabling, where loyalty blurred into dependency, and that recognition feels heavy. Because once awareness arrives, it cannot be reversed. There is also comparison happening internally. One of them may be thinking about your composure, your resilience, your refusal to descend into chaos. Not out of admiration necessarily, but out of contrast. The difference between stability and instability becomes harder to ignore. Chosen ones understand something deeply. When you choose integrity over retaliation, you disrupt cycles. When you choose growth over gossip, you shift narratives. You did not need to fight back aggressively. Your consistency did the work quietly. Now tension is no longer hidden. Trust has thinned. Small disagreements carry the weight of bigger fears. There is defensiveness where there used to be confidence. There is silence where there used to be strategy. And one of them feels the emotional cost more intensely. They are realizing that relationships built on tearing someone else down often lack the emotional tools needed to build something lasting. Conflict resolution requires empathy. Stability requires honesty. Growth requires accountability. Without those qualities, cracks widen quickly. This is not about celebrating anyone's pain. It is about recognizing a principle. What is built on unstable ground will eventually shift, not because of fate or mystical forces, but because human behavior follows patterns. Choices have impact. Intentions influence outcomes. You were never meant to collapse under pressure. You were meant to evolve through it. Now, as their dynamic continues to weaken, your path remains steady. Not perfect, not without challenges, but steady. And steadiness is powerful. The couple that once felt united in their attempt to undermine you is now navigating their own uncertainty. One of them thinks more deeply than before. One of them questions more than before. One of them sees more than before. And when clarity enters a fragile situation, change is inevitable. And here is the part no one talks about. When a connection begins to fracture under the weight of its own intentions, the collapse is rarely dramatic at first. It is quiet. It is internal. It shows up in long pauses, in guarded expressions, in the way eye contact doesn't last as long as it used to. The energy shifts before the circumstances do. Chosen ones, you may never witness it directly. You may never hear the arguments or see the tension. But that does not mean it is not unfolding. When a relationship is formed in opposition to someone who refuses to break, the failure of that mission forces a new question. What are we really built on? One of them is now confronting that question honestly. They are realizing that shared negativity created a false sense of closeness. It felt like unity because they were aligned against something. But alignment against something is not the same as alignment for something. And without a positive, shared purpose, cracks become impossible to ignore. Resentment, once aimed outward, has nowhere to go but inward. The conversations between them are no longer about you. They are about trust, about boundaries, about doubts that were pushed aside in the excitement of being on the same side. And now, without the distraction of targeting you, the emotional immaturity that once hid beneath the surface is exposed. Have you ever noticed how people who bond over criticism often struggle to communicate with compassion? The skill set required to tear someone down is very different from the skill set required to build something healthy. Criticism sharpens the tongue. Building requires patience. One of them feels emotionally drained. There is a quiet recognition that the dynamic they helped create is no longer sustainable. The same intensity that once felt thrilling now feels exhausting. The same secretive conversations that once felt powerful now feel heavy. And deep down, there is a realization forming. Perhaps the problem was never the person they targeted. Perhaps it was the need to target someone at all. Chosen ones, this is where your growth becomes undeniable. While they were investing energy in opposition, you were investing energy in self-development. While they were analyzing your moves, you were strengthening your character. That difference compounds over time. You did not collapse. You did not beg for validation. You did not lose your direction. And that stability forced reflection in places you cannot see. Now one of them is reevaluating their own role, not necessarily out of remorse, but out of self-preservation. When instability threatens personal peace, people begin to rethink their choices. They begin to question what they allowed, what they encouraged, what they ignored. And here is the deeper lesson. Relationships that thrive on tearing others down eventually run out of targets. When they do, they are forced to confront themselves. The unraveling you sense is not coincidence. It is consequence, not punishment, not destiny. Simply the natural outcome of decisions rooted in insecurity rather than integrity. You do not need to interfere. You do not need to watch closely. You do not need to hope for their downfall. Continue forward. Continue building. Continue choosing clarity over chaos. Because when foundations are weak, they crumble on their own. And when foundations are strong, they endure quietly, without needing to prove anything to anyone.